Close your eyes for a moment. The year is 1650. Japan is at peace. The great battles that once decided the fate of the nation are long over, but peace does not mean ease. The sound of steel clashing on the battlefield has faded into memory. The age of constant war, when rival lords fought for control of provinces, has ended. Japan is now under the firm, unyielding rule of the Tokugawa Shogunate, a government that has brought peace, order, and stability. But also a rigid system where every person knows their place. The air feels different from the chaotic Sengoku era just a few generations earlier. In those times, the smoke of burning villages could be seen from miles away, and armies marched across the land with banners snapping in the wind. Now, instead of armies, there are patrols. Instead of fortresses bristling with siege defenses, there are castle towns Jakamachi neat, orderly, and carefully watched. Peace has descended on the land like a soft but heavy blanket. This is the Edo period, named after the capital city Edo, the bustling seat of the Tokugawa Shogun. From here, laws are passed, alliances maintained, and strict social rules enforced. Every class, from the emperor's court nobles to the daimyo, to the merchants and farmers, is locked into its role, unable to move up or down the hierarchy. The system is stable, but suffocating for those trapped in its lower ranks. The samurai, once the blood-bound warriors of chaos, now find themselves in a strange position. Their swords remain by their sides, symbols of power and honor, yet the battles that once justified their existence are gone. For some, peace is a blessing. For others, it is a slow erosion of purpose. In the grand halls of the powerful daimyo, high-ranking samurai still walk with heads held high. They command respect and wealth, their armor lacquered and shining, their homes spacious and well kept. But far from the high council chambers, in the quiet corners of castle towns, another kind of samurai leaves the low, rank retainers. Their names are known to their immediate superiors, but forgotten by the lords they serve. Their stipends are meager, their responsibilities are repetitive, their clothing is plain, their swords kept sharp more from habit than from expectation of use. The streets of a Jakamachi in 1650 tell a story of order, wide enough for 2 carts to pass, lined with wooden buildings whose tiled roofs curve gracefully against the sky. The castle rises in the center, a symbol of authority, its white plaster walls and dark wood beams gleaming in the sun. But the grandeur fades the farther you walk from the central keep. In the outer districts, where the low-ranking samurai live, houses are smaller, walls are thin, and gardens are little more than narrow strips of earth where a few plants struggle to grow. The people here move with quiet precision. Merchants arrange their goods in neat rows, careful not to offend the watchful samurai. Farmers bring in rice from the surrounding countryside, bowing low when passing the castle gates. And the samurai themselves, they are both feared and pitied. They carry 2 swords, a katana and a wakizashi, marking them as warriors. Yet their purses are light, and their daily work is far from glorious. Travel across the land is restricted. Every daimyo must spend alternate years in Edo, leaving their families there as hostages to ensure loyalty. Roads are patrolled, checkpoints carefully maintained. Even the sea is closed to most foreign influence, is tightly controlled, Christianity outlawed, and only a few Dutch and Chinese traders are allowed into the port of Nagasaki. Japan has turned inward, sealing itself from the turbulence of the outside world. But isolation does not mean stagnation. Art, poetry, and theater flourish. Kabuki actors draw crowds with dramatic stories. Haiku poets capture entire seasons in 3 short lines. In the countryside, festivals bring color to the months, even for those who live on the edge of poverty. And among the samurai, there is still a deep pride in heritage, in the code of bushido, a code that demands loyalty, honor, and readiness to lay down one's life without hesitation. Yet beneath the order, there is tension. The peace feels permanent, but in the hearts of some warriors, it is fragile. Without war, how can a samurai prove his worth? Without the test of battle, what does it mean to wear the two swords? For the low-ranking samurai, the question is sharper still. They live in the shadow of their class's former glory, carrying the burden of a name that commands respect but brings no wealth. They cannot take up trade, for it is beneath their station. They cannot rise in rank unless their lord notices them, and in a time without war, such chances are rare. Imagine the castle town at dawn. A thin mist curls around the rooftops. The main road is quiet, save for the sound of a wooden bucket creaking on a well rope. Somewhere in the distance, a rooster calls. A low-ranking samurai steps out of his narrow home. His sandals crunch softly on the packed earth. He adjusts the two swords at his waist, not because he expects to use them, but because they must be worn properly at all times. The fabric of his kimono is faded from years of wear, but clean. His hakama is patched in places, the repairs neat but visible. He walks toward the castle, where his day will be spent either standing guard at the gate or carrying out some small errand for a superior. His stomach is not empty, but neither is it full. The rice ration is modest. The merchant shops he passes are filled with goods far beyond his means. Fine silk, rare spices, lacquered bowls, these are for the wealthy samurai and the merchant elite. He does not stop to look too closely. To linger might invite whispers about a warrior coveting what he cannot afford. In the castle courtyard, the air smells faintly of pine and oiled wood. The guards at the main gate nod in greeting, their expressions neutral. Inside, the bustle of official life moves on without him. Messengers hurry along corridors, scribes bend over their desks, senior retainers discuss matters of policy. He takes his place at his post, the wooden floor cool beneath his feet. Hours pass slowly. He watches the comings and goings, visiting merchants, delivering goods to the kitchens, servants hurrying with baskets of laundry, the occasional visitor from Edo bringing news. His role is to be present, visible, ready should anything happen. Though nothing ever does. Outside the castle, life follows the rhythm of the seasons. In spring, the cherry blossoms bloom, a reminder of the fleeting beauty of life. In summer, the air grows heavy and still, the cicadas singing relentlessly. Autumn brings the harvest, golden fields of rice cut and gathered, carts creaking under the weight of bounty. Winter bites hard in the poorer quarters, where thin walls do little to keep out the cold. Through it all, the samurai maintains his composure. To live in 1650 Japan as a low-ranking samurai is to live in a world of contradictions. You are both privileged and impoverished, respected yet overlooked. You belong to a warrior class in a time when war is no longer the forge of glory. You walk streets where order is absolute, but your own life is filled with uncertainty. You are bound by duty and honor, yet your opportunities to display either are rare. It is a quiet existence, but not an easy one. Every gesture, every word, every choice reflects not just on you, but on your family name. A single slip in decorum could mean disgrace. And while the sound of battle is gone from the land, the inner battle, the fight to preserve dignity, identity, and purpose is constant. This is the Japan of 1650, a land at peace, but a peace that demands endurance. A society where every person has their place, and stepping out of it is unthinkable. A time when the samurai still walks with swords at his side, but the battles he fights are no longer against enemy armies. They are against hunger, against pride, against the slow erosion of meaning in a world that no longer needs warriors. And this is the stage on which the question must be asked: could you survive as a low-ranking samurai? You are called Goknin, or perhaps Ashigaru turned samurai. Your name may be written in the records of your clan, but it will never be etched in gold on a monument. In the hierarchy of the warrior class, you stand far below the elite retainers who sit at the right hand of the daimyo. Your stipend is small, perhaps 10, maybe 20 koku of rice a year, just enough to survive if you are careful, never enough to live in comfort. You carry 2 swords, the long katana and the shorter wakizashi, not because you are wealthy, but because the law demands that all samurai wear them as a mark of their station. They are the emblems of your class, the visible reminder to others that you are a man who lives by bushido. And yet they may be the most valuable things you own. Your clothing is plain, a faded cotton kimono for everyday wear, a better one stored carefully for official duties or ceremonies. Your hakama, wide, legged trousers tied at the waist, are patched where the fabric wore thin. You walk in straw sandals, replacing them often because the roads wear them down quickly. Armor, once a symbol of power and wealth, is a hand-me-down from your father or grandfather. The lacquer has dulled, and the silk cords have been replaced so many times they no longer match in color. Your home is small, 2 rooms, perhaps 3 if you are fortunate. The walls are thin, made of wood and paper screens. In winter, the cold seeps in and bites at your bones. In summer, the air hangs heavy and still, carrying the smell of the nearby rice paddies. You own a few simple pieces of furniture, a low table, a chest for clothing, a rack for your swords. A small altar to the ancestors sits in the corner where you bow and offer incense each morning. Life as a low-ranking samurai is defined by duty, but duty is not always glorious. You may be assigned to guard the castle gates, standing motionless for hours as merchants, farmers, and courtiers pass by. You may be called to deliver messages across the town, walking in the heat, in the rain, or through the biting wind. On some days, you work in the records office, hunched over a low desk, dipping your brush into ink to copy tax rolls or write letters for a superior. The work is rarely dangerous, but it is always demanding. Your superiors expect you to be on time, in proper attire, with your swords worn correctly and your posture impeccable. Any lapse in discipline reflects badly not only on you, but on the household of your lord. And yet, outside of your duties, there is an unspoken truth. You are poor. You may be of the samurai class, but the merchants in town, forbidden from wearing swords, often live in far greater comfort than you. Their shops are filled with fine fabrics, ceramics, and tea. They eat fresh fish every day, drink good sake, and host lively gatherings. You, bound by the code of your class, cannot engage in trade, and your stipend leaves little for indulgence. Some low-ranking samurai take up side work in secret, teaching martial arts, writing poetry for commission, or tutoring the children of wealthy merchants. These activities are tolerated only if they do not interfere with your primary service. Others marry into merchant families, gaining a measure of financial security, though such unions are sometimes frowned upon by the more tradition-minded elders of the clan. There is a quiet pride among your peers. You are warriors, descended from men who fought in great battles. The stories of your ancestors charging through enemy lines, standing unyielding against overwhelming odds, are told and retold in the evenings, over bowls of thin rice gruel. You may never see battle yourself, but the memory of those who did burns in your heart. Still, the peace of the Edo period can feel like a cage. The laws are strict. You cannot travel without permission. You cannot seek employment outside your domain. You cannot raise your status except through the slow grind of years of service, and even then, only if someone in authority notices your loyalty and skill. Promotions are rare, and they often go to those with family connections. Your appearance must always reflect your role. Hair tied in the Chanmage style, the top of the head shaved, the rest pulled into a small knot at the back. Swords carried edge up in the sash, never drawn except in the most serious of circumstances. To draw a sword in anger in public is to risk your life, for the laws on dueling are severe. Every aspect of your life is shaped by jeery duty to your lord, your family, and your class. You may not have the wealth to dress in silk or to host grand banquets, but you have honor, and that is the one thing no one can take from you. Even in hardship, you carry yourself with dignity, for the eyes of others are always upon you. The contrast between the high and low in the samurai class is sharp. In the upper ranks, retainers dine on rice polished to perfection, fish grilled over delicate coals, and sake poured from lacquered flasks. They wear silk robes and commission armor from the best artisans. They have influence in the affairs of the clan. In the lower ranks, meals are simpler barley mixed with rice, vegetables from the market, dried fish. Your voice carries little weight beyond your immediate post, but both high and low share the same obligations: to serve the daimyo without question, to uphold the code, to be ready to give one's life at a moment's notice. The irony of the age is that while the samurai were once feared as warriors, the low, ranking among them, now spend more time with brush and ink than with bow or spear. Your martial skills are maintained through training, but they are rarely tested in combat. You drill with your sword in the early morning, the courtyard echoing with the hiss of the blade cutting through the air. You practice archery, your arrows thudding into straw targets, but the battlefield remains a memory passed down in stories, not an experience you have lived. And yet, in your heart, you know that this life, though humble, though limited, is a life that demands strength. It is easy to be honorable when you are wealthy, when you sit in council beside your lord, when your name is celebrated. It is harder to keep your pride when you are invisible, when the merchants earn more than you, when the years pass without recognition. To be a low, ranking samurai is to live in a constant quiet battle against despair, temptation, and complacency. In the evenings, when your duties are done, you walk home through the narrow streets. Lantern light spills from the windows of tea houses. You hear the soft notes of a shamisen played somewhere in the distance. The air smells of grilled fish and fresh tatami mats. You pass merchants closing their shutters for the night, their coin chests heavy. You pass farmers carrying the last baskets of vegetables to market. They all bow as you pass, for you are a samurai, but you know that some of them sleep warmer, eat better, and have fuller purses than you do. You step inside your home, remove your swords, and place them carefully in their stand. You sit cross-legged at the low table, your wife serving you a simple meal. You speak quietly of the day, a message delivered, a report copied, a gate watched. Tomorrow will be much the same, but as you eat, you glance at the swords, their steel catching the lamplight. You remember that they are more than weapons. They are your soul, your heritage, your unbreakable link to a history of loyalty and sacrifice. It is not an easy life. It is not a glorious life, but it is a life lived by the rules of honor, and for many low-ranking samurai, that is enough. For others, it is a burden they will carry until their dying breath. The first light of dawn slips quietly through the thin paper of the shoji screen. It is not a sudden brightness, but a pale, silvery glow that spreads gently across the tatami floor. You wake without the need for a bell. A samurai's body learns the rhythm of the sun, the rhythm of duty. The room is cold in winter, warm and close in summer. You rise slowly, kneeling first before the small family altar in the corner. A stick of incense is lit. You bow deeply, your hands pressed together, offering silent words to the spirits of your ancestors. It is not a prayer for wealth or glory, such things are beyond asking, but for the strength to serve honorably another day. Your wife is already awake. The faint smell of rice porridge drifts from the small kitchen space. You dress in your plain but well-kept kimono, Tie your hakama around your waist and check the position of your daisho, the two swords that mark you as a samurai. The longer katana sits on your left hip, the shorter wakizashi beside it. You adjust them until they sit just so, the hilts angled for both ease of draw and proper appearance. Even before you step outside, every detail must be correct. Breakfast is simple: rice mixed with barley, perhaps a slice of pickled radish, and a small bowl of miso soup if the household has been fortunate enough to buy miso that week. You eat without waste, in silence. A samurai does not linger over meals. When you are finished, you take your leave with a formal nod. The streets are quiet at this hour. Mist clings to the rooftops, and the air smells of damp wood and distant pine. You pass neighbors, other low-ranking samurai, each dressed much like you, each heading toward their duty post. Some nod slightly, others keep their gaze forward. Conversations in the street are rare. Words are saved for necessary matters. Your assigned duty today is gate guard at the castle's main entrance. It is not dangerous, but it demands precision. The castle is the heart of the domain, and its gates are the eyes through which all who enter are measured. As you approach, you bow to the higher-ranking samurai already on post, then take your position. Your stance is formal, feet steady, back straight, one hand resting lightly on the hilt of your katana, the other free. You are here not to fight, but to be seen to represent the dignity and strength of your lord's household. The hours pass slowly. Farmers come with baskets of vegetables and rice. Merchants bring bolts of cloth, sake barrels, and tea. Couriers arrive on foot, their foreheads damp with sweat, bearing messages sealed with wax. Each one is stopped, questioned politely but firmly, and allowed through only when all is in order. Occasionally, a visitor of importance arrives, a minor noble, perhaps, or an envoy from Edo. These require a deeper bow, a keener eye. By midday, the sun is higher and the street grows busier. You stand as still as a pine tree, shifting your weight only slightly to ease the ache in your legs. The heat in summer is a slow, pressing weight on your shoulders. In winter, the wind slips under your clothing and chills your bones. You cannot leave your post until you are formally relieved. When your shift ends, you bow to your replacement and step away. Sometimes, your duty takes you into the castle proper to carry a message from one official to another, to deliver a record to the scribe's hall, or to escort a visitor to a meeting room. At other times, you are sent out into the town on errands for your superiors, purchasing supplies, overseeing a delivery, or checking on a matter of security in the outer districts. If there are no specific assignments, you return to the barracks or a quiet room in the administrative wing of the castle. Here, the air smells of ink and paper. Low desks are arranged in neat rows, and young scribes bend over their work, copying tax records, writing reports, or drafting letters. You join them, dipping your brush into the black ink, the faint scratch of bristles on paper, the only sound in the room. Writing is a skill as essential as swordsmanship in this time of peace. Later in the afternoon, there may be drills. Even in an age without war, a samurai must be ready. You gather with your peers in the practice yard, the packed earth marked with the footprints of countless training sessions. Under the watchful eye of a senior instructor, you draw your sword again and again, the blade flashing in the light before sliding back into its scabbard. You spar with wooden swords, bakken, the sound of each strike echoing off the walls. The movements are familiar, almost ritualistic. You do not train because you expect battle tomorrow. You train because the body must remember what the mind fears it may forget. Archery practice follows. You stand before the target, the bow taller than you are. Your breath is slow, your gaze steady. The arrow flies in a smooth arc, landing with a thud into the straw. Some days you practice spear forms, the shaft spinning in your hands before thrusting forward in a clean, decisive motion. When drills end, you bow to your instructor and return to your quarters. The sun is dipping lower, casting long shadows across the streets. Children run past, laughing, their bare feet slapping against the packed dirt. The merchants' shops are still open, the air heavy with the smell of grilled fish and fresh tea leaves. You have no coin for such luxuries, but the scents are a comfort in their own way. Evening is a quieter time. You step inside your home, remove your swords, and place them carefully in their stand. Your wife greets you with a small bow, and you sit together for the evening meal. It is not lavish rice with barley again, perhaps some miso soup and a piece of dried fish. If the day has been good, there might be a few slices of fresh vegetable. You eat slowly, speaking little, the soft glow of the oil lamp casting shadows on the walls. After the meal, you may read from one of the few books you own, perhaps a collection of poetry, or a text on military strategy handed down from your father. Reading is not a luxury, it is part of maintaining a disciplined mind. On some nights, you write copying passages from the classics, composing letters to friends in distant provinces, or drafting short poems that capture the mood of the season. Outside, the night deepens. Lanterns flicker in the streets, and the voices of those returning from the tea houses drift through the air. Somewhere far off, a shamisen plays a slow, melancholy tune. You step outside for a moment, looking up at the moon. Its pale light falls across the rooftops, across the narrow streets, across the walls of the castle. This is the world you serve. You return inside, sliding the shoji closed behind you. The house is quiet. You place your swords within reach, as always. A samurai must be ready, even in peace. You lie down on the tatami, the scent of straw in the air, and let your thoughts drift. Tomorrow will be much like today, the same duties, the same meals, the same quiet discipline. Some might call it monotony, but to you it is a life shaped by honor, by structure, by the unbroken chain of service that stretches back through the generations. Each morning you rise and put on the garments of your station. Each day you carry the swords of your ancestors. Each night you sleep with the knowledge that you have fulfilled your duty, even if no one but you and your family will remember the details. This is the daily rhythm of a low-ranking samurai. It is not filled with the glory of battle or the riches of high office. It is filled instead with the quiet persistence of those who serve without praise, who uphold the dignity of their class even when the world no longer calls them to war. And so the days pass, measured not in victories won, but in the steadiness of the steps you take, the sharpness of your blade, and the constancy of your heart, loyalty, honor, duty. These words were not merely moral suggestions to a samurai, they were lifelines, boundaries, and an invisible set of chains that bound a man's soul to his role until death released him. For the low-rank samurai in feudal Japan, the code of bushido was not a romanticized ideal to be recited in poetry or painted on scrolls. It was the air he breathed, the lens through which he saw the world, and the unshakable standard by which he judged his own worth. In a time when peace had settled over the land and war drums no longer echoed across valleys, this code remained as fierce and demanding as ever. The Edo period was an era where samurai were, paradoxically, both glorified and restrained. The swords they carried were not mere tools. They were symbols of a covenant, a reminder that their lives belonged not to themselves but to their daimyo. This relationship between master and retainer was steeped in centuries of tradition. For a low-rank samurai, that bond was absolute. Disobedience was unthinkable. Questioning orders was not an act of courage but of betrayal. Whether the command was noble or cruel, wise or foolish, the duty was clear: obey without hesitation. But loyalty was not simply about following orders. It was a way of living. A low-rank samurai was expected to anticipate the needs of his lord before they were spoken. He might deliver a message across miles of dangerous terrain without sleep, or work through the night copying tax records by the dim flicker of an oil lamp. Every task, no matter how menial, was infused with significance because it was done in service to the daimyo. Even in peace, this service was a battlefield of discipline. A single careless word, a single moment of selfishness, could undo years of faithful work. Honor, too, was not an abstract virtue, it was tangible, as real as the steel of a katana. To possess honor was to maintain an invisible shield that protected one's family name and ensured that one's descendants could walk proudly among their peers. For a samurai, losing honor was a fate worse than death. It could mean public humiliation, the stripping away of rank and privileges, and the slow erosion of the family's place in the rigid social hierarchy. The path to dishonor was not limited to cowardice on the battlefield. It could come from failing in a task, speaking out of turn, or being seen in the wrong company. And so the low-rank samurai walked carefully, every gesture measured, every word considered. His clothing had to be clean, though never extravagant. His bow had to be deep enough to convey respect, but not so exaggerated as to appear mocking. His eyes could not linger too long on his superiors, yet neither could they drift in distraction. Even in moments of rest, he was performing not for applause, but for the preservation of the fragile balance of respect and reputation that his life depended on. Bushido's demand for readiness to die was perhaps its most unforgiving aspect. The low-rank samurai had to live as though every sunrise could be his last. This readiness was not just about bravery, it was about detachment from fear and from the clinging desires that bound other men to life. If his daimyo ordered him into a hopeless battle, he would go. If ordered to take his own life to atone for a mistake, whether committed by himself or even by his lord, he would kneel, compose a death poem, and do so without hesitation. Such acts were not only personal sacrifices, they were seen as affirmations of the eternal bond between master and servant. But peace made this readiness more complex. With no wars to fight, death came not as a flashing sword on the battlefield, but as a shadow that lingered in the mind. Low-rank samurai spent years training for battles that never came, sharpening skills they might never use, and yet these skills were maintained with the same precision as if a campaign might begin tomorrow. To neglect one's martial training was to dishonor the warrior's path, and so even in the absence of combat, the low-rank samurai drilled endlessly in the arts of the sword, bow, and spear. The paradox of their existence was painful. They were warriors in an age that no longer required warriors, servants to lords who might never test their blades, men sworn to die for causes that might never arise. And yet, the code demanded they live as though the call could come at any moment. This tension forged a unique kind of endurance, not the endurance of the battlefield, where adrenaline and the roar of combat carry a man forward, but the endurance of the long vigil, the patient holding of one's post without faltering. For the low-rank samurai, bushido was not a path of glory, it was a path of quiet sacrifices, unrecognized acts of devotion, and an unending awareness of one's place in the world. It required him to suppress his own ambitions, his personal grievances, and his human desires in order to embody a role larger than himself. The merchants of the city could chase profit. The farmers could pray for a good harvest. But the samurai, he could only serve, and serving meant existing in a state of constant readiness, constant vigilance, and constant self-control. This life was not for the restless, nor for the selfish. It was for those who could find meaning in discipline, who could carry the invisible weight of their master's honor on their shoulders day after day without complaint. And it was this more than poverty, more than the lack of glory, more even than the threat of death that made the life of a low-rank samurai so difficult. Few men could hold to such a code without breaking. Fewer still could do so in the shadows, without the recognition or reward that great deeds on the battlefield might bring. Yet for the samurai who endured, bushido was not a burden but a compass. It gave direction in a world without war. It gave purpose to the endless days of guard duty, to the nights spent copying records, to the hours spent drilling with the sword in the courtyard. It turned every act, no matter how small, into a testament of loyalty. And in the end, that loyalty was its own reward. For this was the truth that most could not grasp: to live as a low-rank samurai was to accept that your life did not belong to you. It belonged to your lord, your family, and the name you carried. And to serve that name with honor even in obscurity was the highest victory a man could achieve. The readiness to die was the most haunting, unyielding demand placed upon a samurai's shoulders. For the low-rank samurai in feudal Japan, this was not a metaphor, nor was it merely a noble sentiment to inspire courage. It was a lived reality, woven into the very fabric of his existence. Every dawn carried the silent reminder that the day could end in death, not in the slow decline of age, but in a sudden command, an unexpected duel, or a political twist beyond his control. To live as a samurai was to live with death as an intimate companion, never far from thought, never absent from the quiet corners of the mind. From his earliest training, a low-rank samurai was taught that fear of death was the root of all hesitation, and hesitation was the root of dishonor. This teaching was not born from recklessness, but from the understanding that service to one's lord might demand the ultimate sacrifice without warning. In an age when honor was considered more valuable than life itself, readiness to die became the foundation upon which all other virtues rested. Courage without this readiness was fragile. Loyalty without it was incomplete. To be unwilling to die was to fail as a samurai before the test even arrived. Yet the readiness to die was not simply about battlefield heroics. For many low-rank samurai of the Edo period, there were no great battles to fight, no sprawling war campaigns to join. Peace, imposed by the Tokugawa Shogunate, made the warrior's role more symbolic than active. But the expectation of death did not vanish. It shifted. In the absence of war, the demand became more psychological, more internal. Death could be ordered for reasons that had nothing to do with combat, a political misstep by one's lord, a diplomatic failure, an accusation of disloyalty, even the need to demonstrate resolve in front of rivals. In such cases, the command might come not to kill another, but to end one's own life through seppuku. Seppuku was not merely an execution. It was an act of honor, a final statement that the samurai valued loyalty and integrity above his own beating heart. The low-rank samurai knew this possibility hung over him at all times. If his daimyo fell from political grace, he might be ordered to follow him into death. If he failed in his duty, even in a small task, the expectation to atone with his life could follow. This knowledge was not meant to paralyze him, but to strip away illusions of safety. Every day was a borrowed day. Every breath was a loan from fate. To live with this awareness required a unique kind of mental discipline. The low-rank samurai had to rehearse death in his mind over and over until the thought no longer caused panic. This was not a morbid fixation, but a spiritual training. He might rise before dawn and imagine himself walking to the courtyard to kneel in the white robes of ritual suicide. He might picture his own funeral, the incense curling upward into the sky, the quiet weeping of family members who would carry his name forward. Such mental exercises were a form of inoculation, a way of stripping death of its terror so that, if the moment came, he could meet it with composure. In this way, readiness to die became readiness to live without fear. The samurai could not afford to cling to comfort, possessions, or even the hope of old age. These attachments were dangerous because they tempted hesitation. And hesitation, in the critical instant, could lead to shame. By imagining his own death daily, the samurai learned to loosen his grip on the world, to see each task, no matter how small, as potentially his last act of service. This mindset gave an intense sharpness to life. A conversation with a fellow retainer might be the final one. A patrol through the castle grounds might be the last time he felt the weight of the armor on his shoulders. This discipline also bred a deep humility. The low-rank samurai could not assume that life would reward him with recognition or comfort. In fact, he might die in obscurity, with his name remembered only in the household records. But this did not diminish his duty. His life was a thread in a tapestry too vast to see in full, and his role, whether brief or prolonged, was to keep that thread unbroken until it was time to cut it. Interestingly, the readiness to die did not make the low-rank samurai reckless. Bushido demanded balance. Throwing away one's life foolishly was as dishonorable as clinging to it selfishly. True readiness meant being able to die well for a cause, for honor, for one's lord, but also being able to live well until that moment came. A samurai who rushed toward death without purpose was no better than a thief who squandered stolen gold. Life was a resource, and readiness to die meant using it wisely, with the constant understanding that it could be taken at any time. The tension between living and dying was sharpened by the political fragility of the period. The low-rank samurai's fate could be decided far above his head, in whispered conversations between daimyos or in edicts issued from Edo. He could be summoned in the morning to carry out an errand, only to be told by nightfall that he must prepare for seppuku. The unpredictability of this world meant that the samurai had to keep his affairs in order, debts settled, messages prepared, armor maintained, and relationships left on honorable terms. In this sense, readiness to die was also readiness to leave nothing undone that could stain one's memory. Family life was inevitably shaped by this reality. The wife of a samurai understood that her husband could be taken from her with little warning. Children were raised to revere their father's duty above their personal longing to keep him alive. This created a strange mixture of closeness and distance within the household. Love had to coexist with detachment. A father might spend an evening telling stories to his son, knowing that he might not be there in the morning. A mother might quietly prepare her husband's death robes while also setting rice for his breakfast. Life and death sat together at the family table. For the low-rank samurai, religious belief often provided a framework for this readiness. Zen Buddhism, in particular, with its meditations on impermanence and the illusory nature of the self, offered a way to face death with equanimity. The samurai could see himself as part of an unbroken flow of existence, his life and death merely ripples in the larger current. This perspective did not lessen his loyalty or his sense of individuality, but it softened the sting of mortality. In the stillness of meditation, death became not an end but a passage. In the end, the readiness to die was not about morbidity or despair. It was about liberation. The low-rank samurai, stripped of fear, was free to act with complete commitment. He could walk into danger without hesitation, serve without resentment, and carry himself with dignity even in defeat. His loyalty was unshakable because it was already paid for with his life. The moment he swore service to his lord, he had surrendered the claim to his own future. Everything that came afterward, each meal, each breath, each quiet moment under the evening sky, was a gift given to him until it was time to repay it. Thus, the low-rank samurai's readiness to die was the quiet, invisible core of his existence. It was what made his loyalty unbreakable, his honor untouchable, and his service unending. And though the world might never know his name, and history might never record his deeds, He could walk through life and into death with the unshakable certainty that he had lived as a true samurai. In the Edo period, the world of the low-rank samurai was defined not only by duty and discipline, but also by a deep and unrelenting struggle with poverty. Unlike the romanticized image of the noble warrior living in splendor, most samurai, especially those of the lower ranks, lived lives that were far more constrained and fragile. The rigid social hierarchy of feudal Japan placed them above peasants and merchants in status. Yet paradoxically, many merchants and farmers enjoyed better material conditions than the very warriors who were supposed to stand above them. The reason was rooted in the economic structure of the era. Samurai were bound to their lords and received stipends in rice, measured in koku, a unit meant to represent the amount of rice needed to feed one person for a year. For low-rank samurai, these stipends were small, often insufficient to support a family. Moreover, unlike farmers who could grow their own food or merchants who could trade goods for profit, samurai were forbidden from engaging in commerce. This meant they could not supplement their income in any legal way, trapping them in a cycle of economic dependence on their lord's generosity and the stability of the harvest. This economic vulnerability became painfully clear in years of poor harvest or famine. When rice yields fell, stipends shrank in value, and prices for other goods rose. The low-rank samurai often found themselves pawning their possessions, selling heirlooms, or taking on debts from merchant lenders. This was an especially bitter humiliation, as merchants were considered lower in the social hierarchy, but could wield real financial power over indebted samurai. In some cases, samurai who could not repay debts faced public shame or the loss of their homes. To maintain appearances, some would sell the family's fine kimono or extra armor pieces, keeping only the bare minimum to present themselves in public as warriors of dignity. The contradiction between their lofty social position and their often meager daily life was one of the most difficult realities of their existence. Yet despite these hardships, the low-rank samurai's identity was inextricably tied to his position in the warrior class. Pride and the obligations of bushido kept him from pursuing livelihoods that could have improved his family's circumstances. Even in times when his children went without adequate food or clothing, he was expected to uphold the dignity of his station, never showing overt signs of desperation. This often meant that behind the walls of a samurai home, life could be far bleaker than appearances suggested. Meals might be reduced to the simplest fare barley mixed with rice, pickled vegetables, and miso soup, with fish or meat becoming rare luxuries. Clothing was patched and repatched, and heating in winter might be minimal to save on costs. The economic disparity between samurai and merchants was especially striking in the cities. Merchants, though technically near the bottom of the social order, could amass fortunes through trade and careful investment. They built large, well-furnished homes, dressed in fine silks, and hosted elaborate gatherings. Samurai, by contrast, often lived in small, sparsely furnished quarters within their lord's domain. Their homes were functional but plain, built to reflect their role as retainers rather than businessmen. This difference in wealth sometimes led to quiet resentment, as well as subtle shifts in power. A wealthy merchant might be approached privately for a loan by a struggling samurai, reversing the expected dynamic of social superiority. The inability to engage in trade also meant that samurai lacked flexibility in responding to economic change. While merchants could adapt to market conditions, shift their goods, or exploit new trade opportunities, samurai were locked into the same stipend regardless of inflation or shortages. This rigidity created long-term insecurity, as a stipend that might have been adequate in one decade could become insufficient in the next. Some low Rank samurai attempted to circumvent the restrictions by having their wives or relatives run small businesses quietly, but this carried risks if discovered, as it was considered unworthy of the warrior class. Economic struggle also shaped the cultural and psychological landscape of the low-rank samurai's life. Constant financial pressure reinforced a sense of humility, endurance, and resourcefulness, but it could also foster anxiety and frustration. A samurai might take pride in his sword and lineage, yet feel powerless to improve his family's situation. The gap between the ideals of the warrior, tradition, courage, honor, service, and the reality of scraping by to survive could be a source of deep internal conflict. This tension was further intensified by the obligation to maintain appearances. To let others see one's hardship was itself a kind of dishonor. Some samurai channeled their limited means into education, hoping that scholarly refinement would bring opportunities in administrative positions or teaching roles. Literacy and knowledge of Confucian classics became valued skills, and for a low-rank samurai, gaining a reputation for wisdom or reliability could mean a modest promotion or a slightly larger stipend. Yet these advancements were rare and often depended more on political favor than personal merit. Many simply endured their lot, focusing on serving their lord faithfully, raising their children in the warrior tradition, and preserving the family's honor for the next generation. In the end, the economic struggle of the low-rank samurai was not just a matter of money. It was an inseparable part of their identity. The hardships they faced were both a limitation and a constant reminder that their role was one of service, sacrifice, and resilience. Their poverty did not strip them of their status, but it demanded a discipline of the spirit that was as challenging as any battle. This quiet endurance, invisible in the grand histories of war and politics, was the daily reality for countless warriors whose names are now forgotten, yet whose lives embodied a different, less celebrated kind of strength. The question of whether you could survive as a low-rank samurai is not merely a matter of physical endurance or martial skill. It is a test of patience, humility, adaptability, and the capacity to endure a way of life bound by invisible chains. At first glance, the image of a samurai may conjure visions of valor, sharp steel, and battlefield glory, but for the overwhelming majority, especially in the Edo period, war was no longer the center of their lives. Peace under the Tokugawa Shogunate meant that a samurai's sword was more a symbol than a tool, and his battles were fought not on the blood-soaked plains, but within the narrow confines of everyday existence. In this quiet world, survival took on a different meaning, not avoiding death, but preserving dignity in the face of unrelenting constraint. A low-rank samurai's life was meticulously defined by rules about dress, behavior, speech, and even thought. From the moment he woke up in the modest rooms of his home, he was reminded of the delicate balance between maintaining appearances and managing scarcity. His day began early with duties in his lord's service, whether those duties were martial training, patrolling, or, more often, clerical work and record-keeping. The Tokugawa era was a time of bureaucracy, and many samurai found themselves serving as scribes, inspectors, or local administrators, rather than warriors in the traditional sense. For a low-rank samurai, these tasks were both an honor and a quiet frustration, a reminder that while his class was defined by martial prowess, his daily work rarely called for it. The social pressure to adhere to bushido, the way of the warrior, was ever present. Even though the practical demands of combat had diminished, the moral demands remained as strong as ever. Loyalty to one's lord was paramount, and so was the cultivation of self-discipline. The low-rank samurai was expected to live frugally, act with restraint, and be prepared to sacrifice himself without hesitation if duty called. In practice, this meant being ready to obey orders that might have no personal benefit and enduring conditions that were sometimes unjust. The life of a samurai was not his own. It belonged to his lord and, by extension, to the social order of feudal Japan. For modern minds accustomed to personal freedom, this aspect alone could prove unbearable. A low-rank samurai could not freely choose his profession, move to another region without permission, or marry outside his class without approval. Even leisure was constrained, public behavior was watched, and association with those of lower status could invite suspicion. In the hierarchy of the time, honor was a fragile possession, easily lost by a single misstep. The psychological toll of such constant self-monitoring cannot be underestimated. Surviving meant not only controlling one's actions, but also one's emotions, never allowing frustration, bitterness, or longing for an easier life to show. Yet the constraints of the role did not mean there was no pride to be had. A low-rank samurai's honor was the last fortress that poverty or humiliation could not storm. To endure with dignity, to remain steadfast in loyalty, to teach one's children the same values, these were victories of a quieter kind. The samurai code was as much about how one bore hardship as it was about valor in battle, and hardship was inevitable. The stipend a low-rank samurai received in rice was often too small to support his family comfortably, yet engaging in business was forbidden. The ingenuity required to stretch resources, to repair clothes endlessly, to make simple food satisfying, was as vital to survival as skill with the sword. There were moments, too, when the quiet life could be pierced by danger or upheaval. A lord might fall from favor, plunging his retainers into uncertainty or unemployment. A famine could reduce even the meager stipend to near worthlessness. In such times, a low-rank samurai faced the grim reality that his skills, once so vital in wartime, were of little use in a society that now prized peace. Some became ronin, masterless samurai, wandering in search of employment or odd work, often at the cost of their dignity. Others remained loyal, enduring deprivation rather than abandon their oaths. To survive such trials required a spirit of endurance that went beyond mere survival. It was a conscious choice to uphold the ideals of one's station, even when the world no longer seemed to value them. The discipline of the low-rank samurai extended to the home as well. He was not simply a warrior, but the head of a household, a teacher to his children, and a representative of his family's lineage. Education was prized not only in martial arts, but also in reading, calligraphy, and the Confucian classics. Literacy was widespread among samurai, and for many low-rank families, it was one of the few ways to maintain a sense of superiority over wealthier merchants. Even if they could not match the merchants' material luxuries, they could take pride in refinement of thought and adherence to tradition. In this way, survival was not merely physical, but cultural, the preservation of an identity across generations. A modern person imagining this life might think first of the hunger or the rigid rules as the greatest challenges, but in truth, the most difficult part of surviving as a low-rank samurai was the quiet erosion of dreams. A boy might grow up envisioning himself in armor on the battlefield, yet find himself, as a man, hunched over ledgers in a cramped office, his sword never drawn in earnest. The pride in his status could be slowly worn down by the sight of wealthy merchants living in comfort while he counted every coin. The constant reminder that honor mattered more than comfort could be both inspiring and exhausting. Many samurai endured this without complaint, but it required an inner strength that is rare in any era. To survive in this role, you would need to accept that much of your life was not under your control. You would have to take pride in small things, the polish of your sword, the straightness of your calligraphy, the respectful bow of your child, and find meaning in service, even when the service seemed mundane. You would have to guard your words, hide your frustrations, and live by a code that sometimes demanded more than it gave. You would have to learn to endure envy without acting on it, to measure wealth not in gold, but in the steadfastness of your loyalty. And so, when we ask whether you could survive as a low-rank samurai, we are not asking if you could wield a sword or ride into battle. We are asking if you could live a life in which your freedom is bound by duty, your comfort by frugality, and your worth by the eyes of others. We are asking if you could keep your honor intact when the world tempts you with easier paths. We are asking if you could endure years, even decades, of quiet sacrifice without letting bitterness take root. Most, perhaps 99%, would not last, but for those who could, survival was not just possible, it was a mark of an unshakable spirit, a life lived not in pursuit of ease, but in service to something greater than oneself.